This week's case is about a doll that is supposedly cursed and has caused mischief for over 100 years. So, let's get started. For those that are new here, my name is Brandy, and every Friday I bring you a true crime case or mystery with one or more of my fabulous felines, who they're all like right off camera. Do you want to come here and say hi, Black Phillip? Hey, everybody loves you, my purr evil kitty. Mwah. He's so beautiful. Isn't he so beautiful? For my returning subscribers, welcome back, my feline friends, and a big shout out to my feline fans who are members of this channel and help support it. So before I get started on this week's mystery, I have a couple things. One, I'm sorry if the lighting is a little off or shadowy or darker than normal. One of my lights broke, so I'm in the process of getting a new light, so I had to compromise. So this video might be a little darker than normal. And also, I had a request if somebody wanted to know about the travel mugs in my merch shop. And so I did get a sample because I love travel mugs anyway. And I want to say I'm very impressed with this travel mug. It's metal. And so you can put it in the dishwasher. The logo came out great on it. I'm very happy. It wraps like almost clear around. I love it. And then the top, it actually, it screws on, so it's not one of them like pop and pull, you know. And then the top I really like because it has this huge like flip, and the mouth is like really big. So, you know, sometimes if you block it and it won't come out, you know. But this works great, and then it pops down, and then you can throw it in the dishwasher when you're done. So I just wanted to say that I am very impressed with the travel mug, and I actually use it a lot now, and it's one of my favorite things. So there you go. There's my simple review. You can find these travel mugs in the merch shop. Link is in the description below. Okay, so let's start with this week's, I guess it could be a mystery, but let's start with a little history first, okay? So there was a house that was built in 1898 in Key West, Florida, that was built by Mr. and Mrs. Thomas Otto. Now today it's known as the Artist House, so you may have heard of it. Now obviously Mr. and Mrs. Otto were very well off and lived a very comfortable life. In 1900, they had a son born named Robert Eugene Otto, but they always called him Gene by his middle name. Now, the doll. There are two conflicting stories on how the doll came into Gene's possession. Then the first story is that Gene's grandfather was traveling in Germany in 1904 and saw the doll and purchased it there in Germany and then brought it back to Gene as a gift. Now this doll was 3 feet tall. It was made of fabric. It was stuffed with wood wool, and at one time it was kind of painted like a jester or a clown, but that paint has since faded. And the doll is holding like a stuffed tiger. Now, the doll is dressed in a sailor suit today, which is said to be one of Gene's childhood outfits, that the doll actually didn't come with that outfit, but was put on later after Gene outgrew the outfit. Now, the other story is that Mr. and Mrs. Otto, they had a lot of servants, which they did. They were well off. They were rich. We know this, right? Okay. But the story is they were pretty abusive to their servants, and they treated them very badly. There was one particular servant girl that apparently got the brunt of their abuse a lot. But this servant girl was allegedly versed in, voodoo, and had cursed the doll and gave it to Gene, and it was a way to retaliate for how she was being treated, letting this cursed doll loose in the family. Now, the grandfather buying the doll in Germany makes most sense because the doll was actually made by the Steiff company, which is a German toy manufacturer. But, the doll could have been cursed after Gene got it as a gift. I guess we'll never know the whole story of how this doll came alive. Now, either way, or however Gene got the doll, he actually loved this doll, and it went everywhere with him. Now, he was 4 years old at the time when he got the doll, and he named the doll Robert after himself. Robert was truly Gene's kind of childhood companion and friend, since Gene was the only child. Now, his parents often heard Gene in his room talking to Robert, having these long conversations. And many times they'd state that Gene would ask a question to Robert and they would hear the answer to the question in a different voice. Now, they assumed Gene was, changing his voice as he was playing this imaginary game with Robert. And his parents would ask Gene, like, how can you change your voice like that? And Gene would just look at him and go, I'm not, it's Robert. Now, as Gene grew up and through his childhood, strange things began happening where it appeared like Gene was acting out as like a spoiled child. Things would get broken in the house. There would be, drawings on the wall, just basic living with a child, destroying stuff type of things. When Gene's parents would confront Gene about these behaviors, Gene, carrying the doll around with him, would just look down and say, I didn't do it. Robert did it. Now, one night, there was a lot of commotion coming from Gene's room. Like, we're talking a lot of commotion, like furniture being moved and stuff. And when Gene's parents had gone into his room was completely wrecked, like ransacked. There was furniture toppled over. There was toys like ripped apart, like something that a child wouldn't really be able to do. And Gene himself was actually in his bed, and he was cowered in his bed with the blankets up to his face, and he was scared. And when his parents said, "What happened here?" Gene pointed to Robert, who was sitting in the corner of the room, and said, Robert did it because he was mad. Now, Gene's parents really didn't believe this. They believed that Gene was doing all these things. However, the servants did believe Gene. Now, many claim to hear giggling coming from a room where Robert was in and nobody else was in. So they always said, like, the doll giggled. That was going to be this event that happened throughout over 100 years with this doll, is the giggling. Others stated that they swore as they were kind of cleaning the house, the servants, that they would see Robert run up the stairs. And this happened while Gene was at school, and there was no other kids in the house, so it had to be Robert, right? One time a plumber had come to do some work in the house, and he actually ran from the house in the middle of the job and refused to come back. When Mr. and Mrs. Otto questioned him, he stated that there was a doll sitting in the kitchen while he was working, and the doll kept giggling, and every time he'd turn around to look at the doll was in a different place in the kitchen, and it freaked him out, so he ran. Now, this went on for a while, and Gene's parents had had enough of Gene's, supposed acting out. And because Gene had always blamed Robert for all of this stuff, they decided to put Robert in the attic. Now, after Robert was put away in the attic, Gene's behavior seemed to improve, and he stopped acting out. Now, Robert would end up staying in the attic while Gene grew up as a teenager, and then Gene went to study art in New York and Paris, and Robert just hung out in the attic that whole time. Now, as an adult, Gene was adamant that Robert was to blame for all the negative things that happened in his childhood, and he swore, even as an adult, that Robert was alive. Now, in 1930, Gene met and married a woman named Anne, and Gene told Anne all about Robert. So Anne knew all about Robert before she even met Robert, okay? So shortly after the marriage, Jean's parents end up passing away, and Jean inherited the house. Jean was an avid painter and a bit eccentric, some say, and thus that's how the house got its name, the Artist House. Now, as Jean, when he first moved in, was clearing out some stuff in the house, he went to the attic, and who does he see? He sees Robert, the doll. From the moment Jean found Robert again, Jean became attached to Robert, like immediately, just like he was as a child. Jean seemed to forget like all the negative things he talked about that Robert did. Now, Jean often did his painting in the turret room of the house, which was a round room at the very top of the house, and it had windows on all sides, so there was a lot of natural light. As Jean painted, Robert sat in one of the windows keeping Jean company, and Anne often heard Jean having long conversations with Robert. Now, Anne found Robert creepy because of the stories that Jean had told her, and she didn't like how Jean was very protective of the doll all of a sudden. She wanted nothing to do with Robert, and that often created arguments between her and her husband. Now, Anne swore to family and friends that Robert's facial expressions would change depending on the conversation going on in the room. That if you spoke well of Jean, the doll seemed to smile, but if you spoke ill of Jean, the doll seemed to get angry. She also said that the doll would appear in parts of the house where like Jean was gone and the doll was here, and then it would appear here when Anne was the only one in the house. So she kind of became scared of it as well. Now, Jean always said that Robert was alive. So it's not like he didn't believe Anne, but he just refused to part with Robert. Now, one day, Anne had either gotten very spooked out or had enough of Robert's mischief, and she ended up taking Robert back to the attic. When Jean got home and asked where Robert was, Anne told him that she took him to the attic, and Jean flew into a rage. He told Anne that you cannot disrespect Robert that way, and that Robert needed a window so he could watch the neighborhood and the street. So neighbors would swear that Robert would be in that window in the turret room, like watching them. And as they walked down the street, they would look back up and he'd be in a different window like seconds later, even clear across the room. So they were beginning to think that Robert was alive also. Now, eventually, the argument between Anne and Jean about Robert reached its climax, and Anne pretty much said that Robert needed to go back into the attic or else. So, in order to save his marriage, Jean reluctantly agreed, but he had built Robert his own room in the attic, which included furniture, bed, dresser, and toys like a teddy bear, all that. So, Robert just wasn't sitting in a dusty attic. He actually had his own little room. And occasionally, Jean would go up to the attic to visit with Robert so he wouldn't get lonely. However, even with all this, Robert was not happy with Jean's decision because there's no windows in the attic, so Robert couldn't look out into the street, and he would cause some mischief. So visitors would state that while they were over visiting Jean and Anne, they would hear somebody walking back and forth in the attic, even though nobody was up there. Well, except Robert. In the middle of the night, Jean and Anne would, be woken up because there would be like giggling, like demonic giggling coming from the attic, and they only could assume it was Robert. So nobody else lived in the house. The neighbors, who of course knew all about Robert and was beginning to fear Robert, would tell Jean how creepy it was that Robert was, staring at them out of the window of the turret room all the time. Jean assured the neighbors that Robert was now in the attic, which had no windows, so that's impossible. He couldn't be in the turret room. And the neighbors were adamant. They were like, he was just in there this morning. We saw him. So Gene goes back into the house and he goes up into the turret room, and there he finds Robert sitting on a rocking chair. So Gene picked up Robert, lectured him as he took him back up to the attic, told him he needed to stay in the attic. And the next day, Gene found Robert in the turret room again in the rocking chair. Now, strange occurrences like this would go on, throughout the rest of Gene and Anne's life, really. And Anne had no choice but to just put up with Robert because Gene did not want to part with Robert. Now, by 1972, Gene passed away, and many thought that this would kind of be the end of Robert because the two shared this connection. Oh, no. Can't get that lucky. But Anne loathed the doll, and she went up to the attic and she removed Robert from his room, and she threw him in a locked cedar chest and then put that cedar chest in the corner of the attic. She couldn't bring herself to fully get rid of the doll because of her husband's memory, so she thought if she just, locked Robert in the cedar chest, things would go back to normal. And she was right. Anne never saw Robert again after she did that. And 2 years later, after Gene died, Anne had passed away. Now, Robert apparently waited patiently until he was found in the cedar chest. When a family bought the house after Gene and Anne's death, they found the cedar chest in the attic, opened it, and discovered Robert. Now, this family had a 10-year-old girl who claimed Robert for her own and immediately took him to her room. However, her excitement quickly turned to fear. Robert apparently terrorized her. She quickly became afraid of Robert, and the family ended up putting Robert back in the cedar chest in the attic. Now, even today, this little girl, who is now a woman, stands by her claim that Robert was alive and tried to kill her. And her family states that she is traumatized to this day by this doll, and they're not allowed to say his name around her. Now, years later, the house sold again, and Robert was again discovered in the attic. The owners somehow determined that this doll was the infamous Robert. Now, according to the local folklore, got a history on this doll and realized that this doll was responsible for all these misfortunate events like car accidents, broken bones, job loss, and various other misfortunate events. Now, not wanting to take a chance that their family would be, run amok by this doll, they ended up donating the doll to the Key West Art and Historical Society, since his previous owner was Gene Otto, the artist. Robert was eventually put into the East Martello Museum in Florida, and he continues to cause mischief to this day. So much so that the museum has suggestions on how visitors should approach Robert when they are visiting his display. Those suggestions are: speak to him in a polite way. Ask him permission before you take his picture. Overall, you treat him with respect, and do not ever speak ill of Gene, Robert's former owner. Now, many of the museum's visitors claim that Robert's facial expression changes, again, just like Anne said. And one such incident was that a visitor claimed that he purposely spoke ill of Gene to Robert, and the doll's expression changed to an angry expression. After the visitor left the museum, he got into a car accident. Coincidence? Now, many visitors to the museum report that they've had misfortunes happen to them when they haven't treated Robert with respect. And there are actually letters that these people have wrote to Robert apologizing for their behavior and begging for his forgiveness. There are over 1,000 letters kind of scattered around Robert's display and case, and the museum catalogs every single one of them for future reference. Now, others have stated that they'll hear somebody knocking like on glass as they walk by Robert's display, and when they turn and look, Robert will have his hands up on the glass. But visitors aren't the only one that Robert terrorizes. He also terrorizes the museum staff, apparently. An employee stated that he was cleaning, like dusting off Robert and cleaning his display before the museum closed for the night. When he was done, he locked Robert's case and turned off all the lights and left. The next morning, when he arrived at the museum, he noticed that there was a lot of lights on, especially one right above Robert's display, and that when he went and looked at Robert, that Robert was in a different position than what the employee had put him in after he got done, dusting him, and that when you looked at the bottom of Robert's feet, they were covered in like a fresh coat of dust, like Robert had been walking around the museum all night. Now, Robert is still on display at this museum, and you can visit him year-round, but people say that taking his picture can be a little tricky. If you did not ask him for permission, many state that their cameras just simply stop functioning when pointed at Robert, but then they'll function correctly when the camera is pointed away from Robert. They say the best time to visit Robert is in October, because apparently that's when he's most active. And during the month of October, the museum staff will actually put like peppermint candies in his case in order to bribe him to behave at night and not cause any mischief while they're away. And museum staff will swear that when they come in the next morning, some of those peppermint candies are gone. Now, as for the artist house, it has been turned into a bed and breakfast where you can stay in the famous turret room, which is now called the Turret Suite. However, if you stay in that room, many have reported sounds of somebody walking back and forth across the floor, even though nobody's in the room, and that guests feel they're being watched as they sleep. The staff at the house state not to worry, that's Anne's ghost. You see, when Robert was removed from the house finally years later, Anne's ghost had come back to protect the turret room to make sure that Robert never returned. Are you brave enough to go visit Robert in the museum in Florida? That is now on my bucket list if I am ever down in Key West. If you have visited Robert, please, I would love to hear your story. Did you disrespect him? And if so, did you suffer any misfortunate events? I'd love to hear what you think in the comments down below. If you'd like to become a feline friend, just hit that subscribe button. And if you would like to become a feline fan, please hit that join button for special perks. Thank you guys, and I will see you next week.